in an attempt to combat what we consider the consumerist nature that seems to have overtaken Christmas. I know it seems weird that I'm talking about Christmas on Easter, but you understand when I get there. We kind of started a tradition in our family. Each of us gets 4 gifts. Something to wear, something you need, something you want, and something to read. Now, of course, you know how this plays out for a nerd like me. So, something to wear, I'm a guy. It's the only time you ever get the essentials, good underwear and socks. The good socks, not the ones that fall down, you get socks. This year, something I need, I think I got a briefcase because my other one had fallen apart. But just to show you how even the pastor can game the system, I somehow ended up with 4 books too. So, even as an adult, I try to figure out how to game the system. Now I justify it because a lot of the times I try to buy, theology books or books that kind of help me in my pastoral ministry. And this year there was a book that I'd been eyeing for a while. It was by a guy, even his name, it sounds kind of like this guy knows what he's talking about. The author's name is Jürgen Moltmann. And the name of the book is The Crucified God. Now, I was drawn to the title, I must confess. But when I started this book, I realized I was very much over my head. This guy, Mr. Moltmann, is way smarter than me. He really likes to use Latin and Greek at the same time within like a few paragraphs of each other. Because sometimes, when I read a book, I recommend it for just don't. It's 500 pages. But I realized that I really wanted to wrestle with this book. And don't get me wrong, this is one of those books that I think will have a profound impact on me down the road after I've digested it a while. It's helping me deal with what I call my baggage from evangelicalism. And I really haven't realized all the ways that it's going to change me. But it hasn't been easy. And in fact, I started it the day after Christmas. And I did a marathon of 30 pages yesterday just so I could tell y'all that I finished it. That's how much I wanted to get it done. So the journey from Christmas to Easter for me has been a long one with this book. But Moltmann's main point contained within all 500 pages, I'm going to give you the synopsis, okay, so you don't have to go buy this book, is that in order to understand the hope of Easter, the hope of the resurrection, we must first probe the depths of the crucifixion. See, what initially hooked me on this book and has sustained me through all 500 pages were the opening lines. The cross is not and cannot be loved. Yet only the crucified Christ can bring the freedom which changes the world because it is no longer afraid of death. That opening line, the cross is not and cannot be loved, is something that I have felt pretty much my whole life. Now, I've always said that Easter is my favorite holiday. And it is the holiday that matters most for the Christian church today. But it also makes me profoundly uncomfortable. I must confess, every time that I have to get ready for Easter, because, for a pastor, Easter is kind of like the Super Bowl for church. It's where people come in and you're supposed to make sure that you have your A-game sermon and you're as organized as we can be. A little less chaotic than normal. But that's what there's this pressure for Easter Sunday. But that's not what has given me apprehension. And I've never been able to quite put my finger on it till I was kind of preparing for this sermon. You see, if there is something that I see that is kind of wrong with the church today, it is that it has a profound fear. Fear of waning influence. Fear of the other who is different than we are. Fear of death itself. Everywhere I turn, whenever I see some person put a Christian commentator up on the news channel, there always seem to be, and they don't say that they're afraid, but from the language that they're using, they are afraid of the culture around them. That's what I see, are Christians who are profoundly afraid of the world. And the problem is that this fear has robbed the cross of its power. See, I think it has something to do with how we take this story of the murder of the Son of God at the hands of humans, of us, and his resurrection from the dead, and saying that even though death couldn't stop his kingdom rule, we've taken this wonderful, powerful story and we've turned it into some kind of transactional salvation story where you pray a prayer and maybe go to the front and poof, everything is fixed. In short, I think the church has robbed the cross of its scandal. We've robbed it of its true transformative spiritual power. And what we did is we gave it worldly power, so we didn't have to surrender our whole selves to Jesus. Now, in the early years, what seemed to happen within the church is it became a symbol of empire. The Emperor Constantine decided to slap it on some battle shields and went out and he conquered his little part of the world. And ever since then, from the Crusaders to the Conquistadors, it has been painted on the front of society and has been used essentially to say, convert or die. The church gold-plated it and made it a symbol of religious power. Look at how much God loves us and how successful we are. We owe this all to Jesus. Now, give us more money and sit in our pews. We took Jesus' cruel, unjust, physical death at the hands of empire of man and his call for those to follow him to live the same sacrificial existence. His call for us to take up our own crosses and follow him, and we spiritualized it. We turned a call to be radical disciples who live out the kingdom of heaven in the here and now into a spiritual bank transaction. Just believe in Jesus' death and resurrection and ask Jesus into your heart and you don't have to worry about hell anymore. It's no more radical than a trip to the grocery store. I'll take the $25 go to heaven gift card, please. I've always mistrusted this formulaic version put forth by the church about salvation. Now, if we unload all of the baggage that we as a church have attached to it, if we peel the cross sticker off our weapons of war and power, and we melt the gold off of it, and we get back to this first century wooden execution device, it isn't something easy to love. But if we embrace the one who died on it and his way, then fear is destroyed. This primal fear of the unknown, which we have all experienced as human beings, goes away. It's scandalous, this God who would die for us. And the early church understood how scandalous this whole God dying on the cross thing was. The early church really struggled with a crucified God. In fact, it was so hard, many of the early theological fights of the church centered on the exact nature of Jesus. How much of him was human, how much of him was divine. And when he experienced crucifixion, well, then maybe the divine couldn't really die on the cross. There were early heresies that actually said that somehow the Christ Spirit in Jesus left before the crucifixion because they couldn't wrap their brain around the possibility that a divine being would experience death for humanity. To them, it was foolishness. And yet, through the years, there were always those who insisted that it was the whole being, the whole person of Jesus who did die on that cross. You see, the cross is where Jesus, the very embodiment of God in this world, didn't just take on God's wrath, but man's. Jesus, the one who came teaching about the alternate way of the kingdom of heaven, where the first is last and the last is first, where the poor are blessed and the rich are cursed, where if you want to find your life, then you have to lay it down. This same Jesus said, get your life right because the kingdom of heaven has come near to you. He lived out those same values of this kingdom of heaven. And we as humans, we couldn't stand it. So we did what we always do with people who are different, who make us afraid. We killed them. And you know what the amazing part of it was? He let us do it. It was more than Jesus that died on the cross that day. It was also all the cultural expectations that people carried with them about the Messiah. They died as well. The one who would lead a grand revolt against the Roman Empire, the warrior king who would reestablish the physical metes and bounds of the nation state of Israel, died that day. The kingdom of heaven doesn't come through force, it comes through love. Not just any love, but a love built on sacrifice. Humans aren't just pawns in some divine chess match between God and the devil. Our God takes man so seriously and loves humanity so deeply that he suffers under the actions of man. And he lets himself be injured and killed by us. God has such a vested interest in humanity that he is willing to suffer for us. Not only suffer, but do it willingly, to the point of granting forgiveness even before his death. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they are doing." And they divided up his clothes by casting lots. Not only does Jesus suffer and die because of humans, he forgives them, us. The cross of Jesus forces us to question everything we think we know about a mighty warrior crusader God. It also makes us question all the ways we try to limit how God works and who he works through. If we really stare at it long enough, we shudder at the thought of what this cross really means for us. But we have to focus on it. For if we as people are to overcome our own fear and our love for our own little empires, our little kingdoms made of sand, it will not be with bullets or rebellion or sheer force of will, but embracing the sacrificial love found on the way to the cross. The way to save our life was for Jesus to lose it. Now, I will be perfectly honest. You know, I love to play the game that if Marcus were God, this is what I would do. Even if I had been Jesus and I had loved people to the point of laying down my life for them, sacrificed myself on the cross, if I had went through what Jesus went through, a trial on made-up charges, an unjust execution, the abandonment of all of the disciples who've been following me all of this time, and I did it and I made it through it, I don't know if I would have came back. If I'd have made it all the way through all of that, I would have just been like, I'm done with humanity. There's no reason. I'm not coming back. You know, if I'd have forgiven them, I would have forgiven them at a distance, because we all have those people in our lives that we have to forgive at a distance, that we can't interact with, because I am not Jesus. And I've told y'all before, be thankful that I'm not God. But if that was me, that's how I would see things. I would say, I'm done with humanity. I'm not going back down there. I'm going to leave them to their own devices. You know, in the Old Testament, we had the wrathful God during the time of Noah, who just obliterated everybody. It may not be that mean, but I'm just going to be like, I'm done with humanity. I came down there, I showed them the way to live, and this is the way they treated me. Humans don't deserve resurrection. They don't deserve the kingdom of heaven. Like I said, that shows you that I, as a human, have a long way to go to love like Jesus. For Jesus, though, who was the very embodiment of love, the only thing he could do was come back. The kingdom of heaven is at once so loving by offering itself up for us, and also so powerful that the ultimate mortal threat, death itself, cannot contain it. Earlier in his ministry, when he was confronted with the death of his friend Lazarus, he proclaimed, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. I know, right? You thought you got away from all of those, what we've been preaching on the last few Sundays, these lovely metaphorical I am statements that Jesus makes. But the funny thing about this metaphorical statement is that it becomes literal. You know, all the other ones we struggled with leading up to this point. But this one is prophetic. Because he becomes the thing which brings life out of death. Jesus proclaims it to Mary and Martha. here, but by the end of the gospel, this new life out of death becomes a real thing through him. In a world that is in a constant state of death and decay, Jesus says, I am the thing that brings life out of death, a new life, a good life. After the Sabbath, at dawn, on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven, and going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were so afraid of him that they shook and became like dead men. The angel said to the women, do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, he is risen. Just as he said, come and see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he has risen from the dead and is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him. Now I have told you. So the women, they hurried away from the tomb, afraid yet filled with joy, and ran to tell his disciples. Suddenly Jesus met them. Greetings, he said. They came to him, clasped his feet, and worshipped him. Set against this ugly, awful cross is the empty grave. For if all we have is the cross, then there is no hope. But through the way of suffering, through the way of death on the cross, we have a great hope. And not just a future hope, a present one. See, I think too often the church wants to play the hoping and waiting game. We want to wait for Jesus to come back and fix everything. The narrative goes something like this. The world is rotten and terrible, and there is nothing that we can do about it. So we're going to do nothing, but we're going to wring our hands and tell the world how bad it is, and we're going to hope and pray Jesus comes back soon. And in fact, if we can help, we are going to try to facilitate this second coming by pretty much acting like pious jerks to everyone. So we're waiting on Jesus to come down here and kick butt and take names and bring that kingdom of heaven down here with him. For the record, I think that's terrible theology. And I think Jesus does too, and here's why. What if I told you that because of Jesus' death and resurrection, that the kingdom of God, heaven, is already here? Jesus proclaimed that this kingdom of heaven has already come near, and that he himself is the resurrection and the life, aka the way into the kingdom. The proclamation of these gospel witnesses is that God has raised this Jesus from the dead. It amounts to nothing less than the claim that this future new world of righteousness and the present of God, this kingdom of heaven, has already started to be born. Right here, right now, in the midst of our history of death. Now, it hasn't fully come to fruition yet. The two kingdoms are still there, the kingdom of heaven and the kingdom of man. But when the stone rolled away and Jesus was resurrected, then the kingdom of heaven that Jesus proclaimed in the present tense throughout his life is available to us right here, right now. And that is the power of the empty tomb. As we stand right here, right now, that kingdom of heaven life is available for us. It was all made possible by the God who was willing to become like us. And that's what we celebrate today on Easter. That Jesus came proclaiming this kingdom of heaven, and that death itself couldn't stop it. And that we as people of the church, we live the embodiment of that kingdom right here, right now. It is fitting today that we pause and we celebrate and we do reflect on the power of that sacrifice. For those of you that are our guests, we are going to move into our communion service. And I'm going to just kind of Our service here is meant to, we remember today. Today of all days, we reflect on Jesus' sacrifice for us. And if you are a guest, if you are a visitor, then what I want to say to you is you are welcome at this table. We here at Project Restoration practice what we call the open table. It is not ours. It is the table of Jesus. He is the one who calls. Whether you have been here often or you have not. Whether you have a great understanding and you've been a part of the church your whole life, or, I mean, you came because, maybe your relatives said you needed to come to church. It's okay. You're welcome here. We embrace you here. Be a part of our community. In fact, I would invite you all to participate in this table because in it and through it we celebrate the unity of this kingdom of heaven that we are all a part of, that we have all been called to be a part of. And so this morning we will gather around the table and we'll do it in our usual way. What I would ask everyone to do is I would ask everyone to, you'll be able to come up here, you grab a cup, grab a piece of bread, and it's a bigger crowd today, but it'll be all right. We're just going to kind of all hang out around the table. Let's just make a mob. I like that. All of us gather around here at the table together. So you'll take the bread and take a cup, hold it, and we'll all take it together at the end. All right.